Hey, hi, hello. I should be welcomed back to my channel. It's been about 2 weeks since I've had a video. I did have my TBR come out, but that was like already scheduled. Everything else I have been absent for, and that is simply because last minute I had to take a 5-day trip to Texas for work, and then on the last day I got the Rona. I haven't gotten her yet, and I got it, and I was out for about another week, and I feel like I'm still kind of recovering a little bit. You could probably hear it slightly in my voice still. I'm doing a lot better now, but I might have to take some breaks during this video, so if there are like giant changes in the surroundings, it's because I had to stop talking for my voice. Let's do my July statistics first. I did end up changing these slides slightly because I've always been kind of annoyed that the number of books I read was not on the first slide. And then I was also starting to think, I believe it was last month I read Tokyo Ghoul, which was my first manga ever, and I liked it enough that I think I'm going to try out some more manga. And this year I've been really trying to read more graphic novels. I was categorizing graphic novels as a genre because that's how it is done on Goodreads, and it just didn't feel right. So I decided to change all of that up, and I went back and retroactively changed all of my yearly statistics for 2022. I'm not going back any farther than that. And I now have a category which is talking about the length of the book. So I have 5 options for that, and you'll see it when we get to it. But basically it's novel, novella, graphic novel, manga, or anthology. Let's start with the first slide. So I read 13 books in July. I'm pretty happy with that. July is a rough month for me every single year. I don't know why, but my depression seems to just be triggered in the month of July. Maybe it has to do with it's so hot that I can't get outside like I enjoy doing. Maybe it has to do with things that have happened in July in the past. I don't know, but I was very happy with 13 books, especially because most of those 13 were done kind of near the end, but whatever. Also, I had a record month for pages read. I read a lot of physical books, or ebooks, I should say. So I had really close to 2,300 pages read. Normally, I'm like right at 2,000, maybe just under 2,000. So this felt really good. I aim for about 2,000, and that's about 73 pages a day. And then I read 40 hours of audiobook, which puts me a lot less than normal, and I'm cool with that, about 1.3 hours a day. As for my ratings, you can see the chart. I'm losing my breath, so I'm not going to go through it. And then I did have 2 books that I paused and 2 books that I DNF'd. Technically, one of the books that I DNF'd was a previous pause, so I think I technically paused 3 books this month, but one of them turned into a DNF eventually, and my average rating was a 3.5, which I'm kind of shocked. I thought it would be higher. So honorable mentions, my favorite book I read this month was The Deep, but that was a reread, so I didn't necessarily want to call it my favorite, but it is my favorite. My worst book I read this month was Far from the Light of Heaven, which I was technically supposed to read in August, but screw that. I had some days at the end of July where I was sick at home with COVID, so I read a lot. And then my special mention will be The Queen in Hiding. My most read was novels, as you can see from this chart. Check it out. I really like how this chart is going to be working for me in the future. Up next, my genre stats. I read mostly horror this month, which was kind of shocking. It's almost always fantasy. Almost always. Like 99% of the time it is fantasy. I feel like recently I've just been in a horror kick, and I think a lot of why the horror numbers are up is because I read quite a few horror novellas and I was digging them, so that's fine. And then fantasy is my second most read genre, followed closely by dystopian, sci-fi, magical realism, contemporary, and mystery. I hauled 8 books. I did do quite a spending spree, but 2 of the books were pre-orders, which one I'll be getting, I believe, in August, and one I'll be getting, I think it's in September. And then 4 of those books I read or started to read. One of them I'm still currently in the middle of, which puts me at, I only grew my TBR by 2 hauled books this month. So that's really not that bad because I put my pre-orders on a different shelf until they come in, because it only seems fair. I can't actually read them, like they're not here yet. My TBR did only go down by 1 book though. I didn't read from my TBR as much as I wanted to this month. I was bragging last month that like it was at 32, which means I'll be able to get it below 30. I got it to 31. I'm not really like chuffed by that, honestly. It'll go down next month. And then I also went down in my arcs quite a bit. I came into the month with 11 arcs and I'm leaving with 8, and I've already since then gotten it lower, and I'm so excited. I'm really trying to get my arcs down, like down as low as possible, and it's happening, and I'm so happy. My pre-orders went up, totally fine. My paused shelf went up. It's what it is. And my currently reading went down. So I came into the month with 3 currently reading, and I'm leaving with 2, which is normally where I'm at. I read mostly from adult books, 8 adult books, and 5 young adult books. Nothing new adult this month. Kind of interesting that happened. I tend to read 1 to 2 new adult books, fantasy romance books a month. I think I just really wasn't in the mood for it though. And then where I read from, 57% was from the library. That's a lot of my percent. I read a lot of library books. 28% were owned and 14% were ARCs. And mostly I read audiobooks, which was 42%, but I have a split between ebooks and physical books. And when you add up ebooks and physical books, it's actually more than my audiobook. So that's kind of nice. I'm going to take a breather real quick. You're going to have no time at all. And then we'll get into what I read and what I thought about it. So the first book I read this month was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I had mentioned last month that I was reading a couple of Octavia E. Butler's books because I was trying to get to one, and Parable of the Sower was the book I was trying to get to. Like 2 years ago, I read Kindred, and then last month, or the month before August, I read Wild Seed. And I had very differing opinions about those 2 books. I loved Kindred. I really hated Wild Seed. And I feel like Parable of the Sower was a book that I still had very different opinions about than these 2. So this is a book in a kind of near future where everything has basically gone to shit. And we're following this Black community who is lower income class in the society, yet they're still doing well enough with each other. So they're in this like walled off society, and they are basically like a community of bartering and trading and taking care of each other. And we're following the daughter of the priest or minister in this walled off community, and she starts to have ideas for the world and what the world is and how they could better survive and better take care of each other. And something happens where she ends up on the outside of the wall with a couple of people, and they're traveling through the wilderness. And through most of the book, it's just traveling. They don't really have a plan in mind. They're not really aiming for something, but eventually they meet up with someone who has land in the north, which like the farther north you go, the more things are okay, because Canada is pretty much not dealing with this. Like the horrible things that are happening in this world are happening in America only, basically. And so he has land close to the border, and they're trying to eventually get to that land. And as they're traveling, our main character develops basically an entire religion around her thoughts and beliefs, and starts to convince people to believe in these things. And she slowly starts to become kind of like a priest of her own religion. And this book, I started off not liking it. I'm not a fan of the writing style. It is kind of like a diary entry, and that's something I've said before that I don't like. And around 30% through the book, I did technically DNF it, and I set it down for a while. And then I felt like the whole entire point of me reading this book was not necessarily to enjoy myself, but was to see how Octavia E. Butler handled a dystopian world that is very close to how our world could be. Women have no rights over their body, over anything. They can't own land. They can't own anything like that. But also the classes and races have different amounts of rights, and the people making the decisions are the rich white men. Beyond that, I saw a lot more parallels too, and I am glad that I ended up picking it back up again because the second half I actually really enjoyed, and it left me where I didn't necessarily love this book, but I'm curious enough that I want to continue and read the next book in this series because I want to see how things are continued to handle and how this religion is developed more and more. So I did end up reading this book a 3-star. Normally I would say that I don't personally recommend my 3-star books to people. I say 3.5 or higher as a general recommendation. Yeah, you should probably read it unless I say otherwise. I would recommend it. It's not necessarily my favorite book of all time, but I like what Octavia E. Butler had to say, and by the end I was definitely hooked into it. Next up, I reread The Deep. I have read this on my channel previously, and I can link you to a video where I read it. I've now actually read it twice on my channel technically, so I'm not going to talk about it long, but it is also it's a horror, but it's another kind of dystopian where the world, disease wiped out most of the world and causes memory loss. And we are following this main man who is a veterinarian who is called to the bottom of the ocean by the military because his brother is down there trying to find a cure, and they have lost contact with his brother. And so he's sent 8 miles down into the bottom of the ocean and things go wrong. I love this book. I don't think I liked it quite as much as The Troop, which is the same author, but upon reread I can say that this is still a favorite of mine. I still rated it 5 stars and I still loved it, and I see why some people would not necessarily love this one because it does have lower ratings than The Troop, although both of them have low ratings, let's be real. I don't think it's quite as horrifying as The Troop, which is why I don't think I like it as much as The Troop, but I really like a lot of the concepts and a lot of the discussions that are had in this book, and it's another one by Nick Cutter where I just felt like I couldn't put it down the entire time. Up next, I read On a Sunbean by Tilly Walden, and this is a graphic novel. It is a sci-fi graphic novel. It is a lesbian sci-fi graphic novel about this young girl who, it's told in 2 timelines. One timeline is when she is going through, I want to call it like high school. I think she's like a freshman in high school. It's British, so I'm not totally sure what the grades are, to be honest. She meets this girl and they fall in love and start dating. And everyone in this book is a woman or non-binary character. First off, I need to say that. So everyone in this book who's in a relationship is automatically queer. And then the second timeline is after she's graduated high school, she joins this recovery team. I don't think that's quite the right word. They go along to these different space planets and stations and asteroids, and people have basically abandoned them for one reason or another, and they fix them up so that people could come and live on them. And she has joined this crew because she wants to explore more of space because she's trying to find her girlfriend from high school who kind of disappeared suddenly. Not under mysterious circumstances, but suddenly. I enjoyed large aspects of this book. The artwork I thought was really good. The diversity was really good, not only in sexuality and gender orientation, but also in race and skin tones. But overall, I feel like the characters were kind of lacking and read super young to me, especially the after high school. Like at that point, you're 18, 19 years old. You should be acting a little bit more mature than these characters were acting. I feel like there were some aspects of it that I didn't really like. There's a whole entire character in here who doesn't speak because of trauma that happens to them. And at one point they do speak, and I didn't see any reason as to why that character would be speaking there. I didn't have an understanding as to what changed, but then the character went back to not speaking, and I'm fine with the character growing and getting through their trauma and developing and even regressing at times, but I felt like I wasn't understanding why that was all happening. Next up, I read Violet Made of Thorns, which was an arc. I do believe it is out now, so you can go and read it, but I personally didn't love it. I loved the beginning. I was like really into the first 30% of the book, and I was like, wow, this is going to be a YA fantasy romance that I'm going to actually recommend to people because it's been a while since I've read one that I've loved, and I ended up not loving it. it. It just felt like it went really tropey in the second half, and that the author like lost her spark of what was making the book like really interesting to me. The main character is really unlikable, and it does read a lot like a fairy tale book. I don't know, something just lost me. So we're following this main character who is a seer to the kingdom, and her and the prince hate each other, but he has this prophecy about him that says that his future wife will either save or destroy the entire kingdom. So he has to find a wife and try to get married. So they're going to throw him a ball and try to find a wife, and there's enemies to lovers. Our main character is bisexual, I want to say. I don't totally remember. This book didn't stick with me as anything special. Next up, I read Hell Followed With Us, which was such a shocker for me. I knew this book was going to be good. I didn't know how good it was going to be. So this is a YA dystopian where it is heavily focused on the religious trauma of queer or trans and queers synonymous, specifically trans characters' religious trauma in a dystopian world. So we are following this main character named Benji, who is a trans boy, and I really like how they handled that. I am not trans myself, so I can't say whether or not it was accurate to trans people's experience, but I really liked how they handled it, because through most of the book you're aware that Benji is trans, but it's like a side thing. Like, you're not focused on it. It's not up in your face. And so halfway through the book, when you do get characters starting to misgender and dead name our character, you're just as disgusted and you're just as outraged, because Benji is Benji, and you have only known Benji as Benji. You don't even know this character's dead name until much late, like 60-70% through the book. And the characters who dead name and mispronoun our main character Benji are the most vile, villainous characters, and there's no question about how the author felt about the fact that they were doing this, and the fact that if someone is going to not respect someone else's name and pronouns, that they are villains. And anyways, so that was done really well. But Benji is being raised by this religious cult, and they have basically turned Benji into this monster, and they call him is it a Raphael? I don't remember the exact word, but there are like angels that work for these people, which are basically like soldiers, like super soldiers kind of a thing. Anyways, Benji escapes and teams up with this group of queer teens who are living in basically like an abandoned YMCA and are trying to just survive. The whole entire world is in chaos, and this religious group is trying to hunt Benji down because they kind of think that it's a Raphael. I'm pretty sure that's what he is. They're pretty convinced that he can bring change to the world, and it was just so good. So some of the representation in this book, there are multiple characters who are trans. There are some characters who are non-binary. There is a character who uses them pronouns, which is the first time I had experienced reading that, and so I got to do a lot more research into neo pronouns, and I'm still doing my research and still learning some things, but that was represented there. There are lesbian and gay characters, there are characters of color, and there is an autistic character in the forefront who's actually the love interest, and it is so beautiful to see how Benji accepts his love interest's necessities to be in a relationship. I don't want to go into tons of details, but basically the autistic character that Benji is interested in wants nothing to do with physical contact, and yet they can still have a beautiful and loving romantic relationship. Anyways, this book took me by surprise, but I will say it was really hard to read, especially if you have any type of religious trauma, especially if your religious trauma deals along with gender or sexual orientation. But if you can read this book, I highly recommend reading this book. It was so good. I rated it a 4.5, but sometimes I think about just rating it a 5-star and calling it a day, honestly. Up next, I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I didn't love it. I rated it a 2.5. It's a magical realism book, but it's more of a historical fiction book about these two men who are wizards, and they're basically the only wizards of their time because magic has left England. And just what really kept me from falling in love with this book was the writing style. It's very old historical Englishy type writing, but what kept me from DNFing this book was the magical realism was A+. And then next I read Girl in Pieces, which I actually borrowed from my library. It was due back yesterday, so I had to return it, unfortunately, so I can't hold it for you. But I really liked this book, and I read this on a live sprint with some people, and I read like 200 plus pages on that live sprint. It is a YA contemporary. It was really hard hitting. The main character is a young girl who has gone through a lot of stuff in her life, and she at the very beginning is in a psych ward trying to get help because she is a self-harmer and she attempted to commit suicide, and so she's getting help now, and very quickly in the book the money runs out and she can no longer be staying at this place. And so it's about her taking the tools that she learned from this place and using them in the real life and trying to get a job and trying to get an apartment and survive. And I think she's like 17 in the book, and it's about her getting a relationship with this man, and this man being a user, and how falling in with people in your life and the people around you can really affect how your life is going. I don't want to spoil anything, but the book does have a happy ending, and I was very happy with how things resolved in the end because I was worried for a while. I devoured this book. It was so quick to read and I felt like I couldn't put it down, and I really enjoyed what it had to say, although it was rough and it was hard to read, and I wouldn't recommend it to everyone just because of the subject matter. Trigger warnings in the summary. Definitely know though about like abuse of alcohol and pills and stuff like that also is in there. And then also sex trafficking and rape is also a subject that is brought up. It's not anything that is done on page, I don't believe. But I really enjoyed reading this book, and I rated it 4 stars. And next up, I read A Queen in Hiding, which I didn't read this copy, but after I read it, I bought a copy, and then, I don't know if you can see back here, but then I bought the next 3 books in the series. It's a complete quartet, and when you put them all together, the crown is complete. Anyways, I really loved this book, and I'm actually in the middle of book 2, and I'm really loving it as well. This is the only other book I rated 5 stars this month. I don't even know how to talk about it, to be honest. This book is like an all-encompassing. How do I talk about this book? So it's an epic high adult fantasy. It reminds me if you took Game of Thrones and mixed it with Queen of the Tierling. A lot of our focus in this book is along a queen and her princella, but there are so many POVs, and you get to see POVs from all of the different realms and all the different lands, that bigness of Game of Thrones matches it better than the kind of more tight world view in Queen of the Tierling. And the very beginning, the queen is starting to have opposition from outside of her country and from inside of her court. And so she goes on the run and puts her princella in hiding. And so she goes to start fighting on the seas with her husband, and basically becomes a pirate. And her princella is in hiding. She is waiting for the day for her mom to return to her, and then she can go back and rule her kingdom. Each of the royal line in this book, the queens have magical abilities, and so our main queen in this story has the ability to erase people's memories. And oh, it's fantastic how she does it and how she uses it, because she is truly good and she doesn't just like do it willy-nilly. And then our princella has the ability to communicate and control animals, and I also really liked how they handled that, and it's a new favorite of mine, and I'm so excited to continue on with this series. It reminds me of everything good that I love in high epic fantasy. I'm like really about to enter into my queendom phase of fantasy, where like I'm only interested in reading books where there's a queen in control. I'm not mad. So yeah, this is why this series is now getting put next to Queen of the Tierling and In a Garden Burning Gold, because they all just have that kind of like, In a Garden Burning Gold doesn't necessarily have a queen through most of the book, but it does have sort of a queen. But I love powerful women in power, okay? That's all I want to read right now. Next, I read Where Darkness Blooms, and oh my god, the writing in this book was fantastic, but the plot ended up losing me a lot. This is an arc. This doesn't come out until next year. When I started it, it was reminding me a lot of Wake the Bones or Bone Gap. Books that I have really loved, that like dark magical realism where it's like weird and you're not totally understanding everything, and I love that vibe. And I was so honored because the publisher like reached out to me on this one and was like, hey, I think you'd like this. I was just like so excited about this book, and then it just kind of flopped for me. I think where it flopped was there were too many POVs. There were 4 POVs, and I really think there should have been 3. I don't know, the villain didn't do it for me in this book either. So we're following this town named Bishop. And in this town it is known for 2 things: sunflowers and missing women. We're following 4 young girls. They all live in a house together. Their mothers all lived in a house together. They were just really good friends, and when something happened with all of their husbands, they decided to move in with each other and raise their daughters together. So there are 3 moms, 4 girls. The last set of girls are twins, and so they're all around the same age as each other, and their moms go missing. And so most of the book is, I think it's like a few years after their moms went missing, and I think it's like 2 years, and they are really starting to investigate like what happened to their moms, because like no one's talking about it and no one's figuring things out. And one of our girls, her girlfriend went missing about 6 months ago, so she is really like, we got to figure out what's going on with these women. I loved the writing. Oh my god, her writing was so beautiful, so amazing. But I did feel like there were times where she was way more focused on writing analogies and pretty metaphors and beautiful prose than she was developing the plot. And I was like, okay, your writing's beautiful, but like I'm gonna need something else here. And the book is not, I think it's like 300 pages, so I don't understand how I got so bored in it. But I did end up rating it 3 stars. Next, I read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which is a horror about these 2 women who are discussing the sale of an apple peeler through emails with each other, and then they start to strike up a unlikely romance, but it's a horror, so get ready, because boy, this one did it for me. I like wasn't sure. It's very short. It's a novella, and I tend to not like novellas, but the author did it. Eric LaRosa, I will be reading other books by him in the future because this one piqued my interest. I rated it 4 stars. It definitely didn't have 5-star vibes, but it was so enjoyable to read, and there were parts that were like, I was aghast, I was sickened, I was disgusted. Like, for how short, I think it's like 120 to 130 pages, and it's just a bunch of emails between these 2 women. It worked. He did it. He did it really well. I'm not going to spoil anything else about this book. If you like horror, if you're okay with disgusting horror, absolutely go read this book. And then next I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. Hold up, I own that. I don't know where it is, but hold up, I'm gonna go find it. So I am actually one of the worst people ever to exist, because I still haven't fully unpacked from my trip, which I got back about 2 weeks ago. So that's where this book was. It was still in my luggage because I read it when I was in Texas. I read this book in like 2 days. I devoured it. I couldn't put it down. It wasn't the best book ever. It's about these 6 friends who come back together for a college reunion, a 10-year reunion. There used to be 8 of them, but one of their friends killed another one of their friends. But our main character doesn't think that that friend is actually the murderer. So while they're on this reunion, start to investigate some things. It's not really her that's bringing the investigation up, to be honest. Another character, but basically we're drawn into like trying to figure out who actually murdered Heather. The characters are all horrible. Honestly, the book leans more dark academia than it does lean thriller, but it does have like mystery thriller aspects to it. Every single character is just so god awful. Like, our main character is so fixated on coming back to this college reunion and appearing better than everyone else. Like, that's her whole goal in this book. And yet I like couldn't put it down. I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop reading it. I enjoyed reading it. I think it's something I would reread. As you can see, I annotated it. I like heavily annotated this book. I like wrote notes in it. and I like drew pictures in it. Let me see if I can find one. I like drew pictures in it too. And I'm really bummed that I did all of that while traveling because you guys never got to see that. So I'd really love to pick up another like mystery thriller and do like a whole spoilerly vlog where I annotate as heavily as I did with this, because it's so cool to see my annotations, and there's like pictures in here, like printed out pictures and poems and lots of stuff. So it's just like a really cool, almost like a piece of artwork this book is. I don't know why I'm talking like Yoda right now. I'd love to have that experience with you all at some point. But I ended up rating this 4 out of 5 stars. Couldn't in good conscience give it 5 stars. I found the whodunit to be very predictable. Not very predictable, I should say. There were parts where they threw me off and I was thinking it was someone else, but by the end I was pretty convinced of who it was, and I was correct. And I was also convinced of why they did it, and I was correct. It's fine. It's fine. It was good. It was a fun, enjoyable book, and I'm glad I read it. Next I read And Then I Woke Up, which was, I was on a novella horror kick, and this is the one where there's a disease going through the world where if you get the disease, you think you're living through a zombie apocalypse. And so our main character is recovering from that, and he is also in some type of like recovery psych ward, and he is with this woman who has also recovered, but she sees on the news one of her friends from when she was tramping through the wilderness trying to survive the zombies, and so the two of them escape, and he is trying to reunite them. And it's about terrible things that you'll do when you think there are zombies everywhere, because basically you see anyone who doesn't have the disease, you see them as a zombie, and so you're trying to kill them, but like they're just a normal human. So it's talking a lot about that. It's talking a lot about characters and what they'd be willing to do, and about diseases and perspective, and whether or not your perspective is basically the only one that matters. I liked what the author had to say, but I thought it was going to be a lot more zombie-esque in this book, and it's not. You really don't have much zombie interaction at all. And I felt through most of the book that I was like skimming it to get to the good part, and then the book ended and I never got to the good part. It says here that I rated it 3 stars. I thought I rated it 2.5, so I rated it 3 stars. And then finally I read Far From the Light of Heaven, which I will say right now, I read for Magical Readathon. I know I read it in July and not in August, but G always says that you can go past August if you need to, depending on how your health and everything is going. Because of my health, I was stuck at home like 4 or 5 days without anything to do and kind of being stuck in bed really tired. So I took that to mean I could start Magical Readathon early for my health. So this book I read because it was on someone else's worst book of the year, and it might be on my worst book of the year. I went into it really enjoying the beginning. It's about this young woman who is captaining a space shuttle to this far off planet. It's going to take 10 years, so they all go into like sleep mode, and when she arrives, a lot of her crew is murdered, and so they bring a detective from the planet that she was going to up onto the ship, and the two of them are trying to investigate who did the murdering. And I was really interested in it until there was this like weird cyberonic wolf that was like wandering the corridors, and things just got like super weird, and I was getting kind of confused because the author like brought up aliens as if I should already know who they are. So like halfway through the book, they're like, oh, there's, you know, that type of species, and I'm like, wait a second, not everyone is humanoid. And then the murder mystery part I thought was just not done well. Like it wasn't the main focus, and the book is really short. I can't remember how long it is, but I think it's like 9 to 10 hour audiobook, and there's so many different POVs. Like it's really trying to be an epic, but it's like not able to be an epic, and it's just weird, and I didn't like it, and I rated it a 1.5, but I ran it up to a 2 star just for the sake of it. That's it completely for books I read in July. I'm out of breath. I'm really tired. I've been coughing a lot. So I'm going to go lay down and take a nap. And I appreciate all of you for sticking with me through this month and next month as I try to get back on track with things. And my schedule will just be weird. And I hope you all had a really good reading month. So I appreciate each and every one of you. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye!